wait for the other crew to come in. Might be a second, we've just got some more people coming.
Well, good morning, everybody. Isn't it great to see a beautiful day after the last 2 weeks of cloudy weather? So, welcome to Midtown Centre. In particular, we'd like to welcome the Treasurer, the Honourable Cameron Dick, Minister Grace and Assistant Treasurer Charisse. Also like to introduce Jack Hutchinson from Hutchinson Builders, who have been our building partner on this project for the last 3 years. We're here today at Midtown Centre, a joint venture between Ashmorgan and D-Man Corporation. My name's Scott Miles, I'm the head of Ashmorgan Queensland. Welcome again. Ashmorgan is a Sydney-based property investment group with about $4 billion of assets nationally, about $1.5 billion in Brisbane. Most recently, you might have noticed the purchase of 310 Ann Street for $210 million about a fortnight ago. I'm going to give you a quick overview of Midtown, just touch on some of the highlights, and I'll hand over to the Treasurer and his team to talk further. We're very excited by Midtown Centre. It's Brisbane's newest A-grade office building, 45,000 square metres. More importantly, though, it's an amazing sort of contribution to urban regeneration. You know, we stand here in level 20. 2 years ago, we would have been standing on the plant room deck of Forestry House, a slightly ageing 30-year-old concrete building, and across on Charlotte Street, across a 13-metre gap, was exactly the same building called Health House. Both well built, but probably due for a refurb. We could have knocked them back down to the ground, but instead, using some of the ingenuity of Hutchison builders and the design team led by Fender Castellides, we've been able to recycle the buildings, build 7 levels on top, and create a brand new modern building for the Brisbane CBD, including a new laneway on the ground floor. Going with that, we were able to salvage all the concrete and steel that was in the original construction, which meant that all the embedded carbon that goes with those materials was retained, making this building about 37% more energy efficient than the equivalent new build, which, just to put that in perspective, is about 4 years of operating the building carbon neutral. So we're very proud of what we've been able to achieve here. Currently there's about 280 jobs on site, with the workers finishing the building off. Over the life of the project, 480 full-time equivalents will be involved in the project, with about 1,000 more jobs off-site in the supply chain for materials. The project has an end value of $700 million, and when occupied will have between 3,500 and 4,000 workers. So that's all I was going to say. Thank you very much for coming today. We're very proud of this project and proud to have the Minister and his team here. Thank you.
Well, good morning everyone, including everyone watching online this morning. Some good news this morning in relation to COVID cases. One overseas acquired case which has been detected in hotel quarantine, which is great, and no new active cases in the community. No locally acquired cases, which is great for Queensland. Almost 10,000 tests in the last 24 hours, which is also a great response by Queensland. So if you've got any of those symptoms, please ensure you get tested. It's great to be here this morning in this terrific $700 million project here in the Brisbane CBD, as we see the revitalisation of our capital and economic activity happening here in Brisbane, but also representative of the economic activity that is happening around Queensland as we fight back against COVID-19. I'm here this morning with Minister Grace, the local state member, and also the Assistant Treasurer, Charisse Mullen, and also the team from Hutchies. Thanks to Hutchinson's builders and also Scott and his team for the investment they're making in Queensland. Of course, we saw a difficult 2020 for Queensland business and industry, but we're seeing growing confidence coming back into the Queensland economy. Throughout the skyline here in Brisbane in the first quarter of this year, we see 21 additional cranes on the horizon. And that's symbolic. That's symbolic of the economic activity that is happening here in Brisbane and around Queensland. And the economic data that we're now receiving as a state demonstrates the sort of response that we're now getting to our economic recovery plan. Last year, Queensland had the highest economic growth in the country. State final demand grew by 2.4% in Queensland, which was twice as fast as Western Australia and better than the national growth in final demand. Of course, Queensland's household expenditure grew by 2.6% in 2020, when national household expenditure went down 2.7%. Private investment grew by 0.7% in 2020 in Queensland, a small figure, but it beat the nation when private investment fell by 1.7%. And of course, we've seen jobs come back to Queensland. In January this year, there were 50,000 more people working in Queensland than there were in January last year, before the pandemic struck. We are one of the few places in the country that's recovered more jobs and some more since the pandemic took hold, and that's a great result. 2/3 of those additional jobs are full-time jobs, and that's great for Queenslanders and their families as well. Now, in February, we saw the biggest fall in unemployment in the nation across all the states. That was in Queensland, and we had the highest fall in underemployment, and that means more Queenslanders are doing more work in our state, and that's a great outcome. We've still got a long way to go to recover from COVID-19, but all of this data tells us that we are heading in the right direction, and our government will continue through our economic recovery plan, through the settings we put in place in the budget last year. We will continue to support those businesses and industry, including the construction industry, that are creating jobs for Queenslanders across the length and breadth of the state. We've also been working with some of the large banks to get more real-time data about what's happening in the economy, and consumer spending. Consumer spending for the year going into Easter this year was higher than it was last year, which is not surprising given the COVID pandemic was taking hold this time last year. But very pleasingly, it's higher than it was in the same period in 2019. So we are moving ahead as a state, which is very important. Our number one priority as a government is to create jobs, to get those economic settings right so we get great investment like this project, not just here in Brisbane but around Queensland, to create jobs and to create opportunity for Queenslanders. So I might leave it there, hand over to Minister Grace, and then happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Treasurer, and it is great to be here with the Treasurer and with the Assistant Minister and Scott and Hutchies as well on this great project in the middle of my electorate, whether it's cranes from Fortitude Valley through to Bowen Hills to right here in the heart of the city. Our economic indicators, as the Treasurer have outlined, are demonstrating that Queensland is moving ahead. Whether you base it on economic growth, on private investment, on commercial investment, on the growth of jobs in this state right throughout Queensland, we are beating the national average, and it's great news not only for my electorate of McConnell but for the state of Queensland. Obviously, we know we are still not out of the woods when it comes to a worldwide pandemic, which is why these projects, which generate thousands of jobs and both direct and indirect, and these two buildings that are going to be connected by a most beautiful laneway here in the heart of Brisbane is going to have at least 3,500 to 4,000 employees working in this building alone. And it's a great engineering feat to have two a little bit tired buildings now being merged into one significant building, and here we are on the 20th floor with wonderful outdoor spaces, which is part of the architectural design. This is great news for Queensland. It's an honour to be here with the Treasurer, and as a local member, I know that when I see the cranes around, it is good news, and we are ploughing ahead with the growth that we require and the jobs that we wake up every day as ministers and assistant ministers making sure that we deliver for Queensland. Great to be here, and congratulations to the team on this fantastic project.
Okay, happy to take any questions you might have this morning.
In terms of incentives for tourism, the state government's bigger show spend. We've had quite significant spends in other states. Is Queensland government doing enough to support the tourism issue?
Well, the data that's been released today is clear. COVID, of course, has had a huge impact on tourism and tourism-related businesses across the nation. But the data today reveals we've had one of the strongest rebounds of any tourism industry in the country, certainly better than New South Wales and Victoria. And a lot of that has to do with the $790 million that we have invested in the tourism industry. We, of course, had to recover from the cuts of the LNP, who stripped $200 million out of tourism support, and in that time as a government and during this COVID recovery period, we've invested more than $790 million, and that's been very important to have targeted responses to this. Of course, the real price that the tourism industry is now paying is in relation to JobKeeper being turned off. And that's going to be the biggest challenge. The labour force data I've talked about today doesn't take into account yet the consequences of the federal government turning off JobKeeper. So our strong response and our strong support of the tourism industry, that will continue. The voucher program we designed with the tourism industry. We didn't do it on our own like the federal government did with their half-baked, half-price ticket scheme, which stops Queenslanders visiting their own state, but instead encourages Queenslanders to go to Launceston in Tasmania, Merimbula in New South Wales or Avalon in Victoria, but does not support Queenslanders seeing their own state. So we'll continue to invest to support tourism industry participants across the state, and our strong investment will continue to deliver positive outcomes. We're assessing the impact of the lockdown, but the reality is in a lot of the sectors, particularly in not just in South East Queensland but across Queensland, we've had a very strong Easter. We've had a very strong economic recovery through this period, and you wouldn't be surprised when you see a day like today. So we're going to monitor that closely, particularly over the school holiday period, to see what the economic activity has been. We've seen some strong bookings, strong activity in accommodation and retail and hospitality as well. So our number one thing is to monitor what the rebound is out of the lockdown. Already the data shows some pretty good economic activity, so we'll monitor that and look at what we need to do. But so far we've invested almost $7 billion, almost $8 billion to support COVID recovery, and because of those investments, including our small business adaptation grants, it allowed businesses, particularly small businesses, to pivot to operate in a different fashion, and that makes them more adaptable and flexible, which is why we're getting some of that economic activity. Beg your pardon? We'll continue to monitor it non-stop. That's what we will do. And the work that we've done with the large banks to look at some of that real-time data shows that spending is up. Spending in the period up to Easter is up, higher than last year and higher even than 2019. So that shows you that activity is going on. That activity is happening in the economy, which is good for businesses and good for jobs. Well, we're seeing the economic activity. We're seeing people going to pubs and clubs. I mean, when you look at what's happening around the world, when you see what's happening in France and Germany, which are in lockdown again, even in Japan, they're now anticipating perhaps a fourth wave of COVID. Restrictions now coming in Osaka as the Olympic torch relay goes through that city. The prefecture governments now really stop people participating in the relay. We've got economic activity happening here. So taking the health advice, staying safe and ensuring that we can continue to keep businesses open. I mean, short, sharp lockdowns demonstrate that by locking down quickly but for a short period, it avoids the long-term cost, the long-term economic impact of COVID getting out of control. And that's what we've done for 12 months, and that's due to the great work of Queenslanders. So Queenslanders respond strongly to the health advice, and that's good for everyone, including our economy. Well, the lead on that project is the Deputy Premier and Minister for State Development. We did a lot of work pulling that together. It's one of the first things I did to pull that project together and to make sure the investment of $100 million came together. There's now an investment review group that's looking at projects across Queensland, projects big and small, to ensure that we get the right mix and also get the right outcomes for regional Queensland. So I'm confident in the work that that group's doing to look at how that investment can be made to get the best value, and that's what we need to do to support economic recovery in regional Queensland, which is so important because our regional communities, particularly in mining and agriculture, have done so much heavy lifting to support the Queensland economy. So we'll continue to, I beg your pardon? Yes, that's one of the first things I did as Treasurer. Yeah, that's one of the first things I delivered as Treasurer was to lock in the $100 million package, government funding and funding from the resources industry. You may recall it's one of the first things that I achieved as Treasurer. And now that review committee, which is made up of local government, community representatives and government, will now work out how's the best way to distribute that so we get the best bang for our buck. Well, we'll hear more from the Prime Minister today out of National Cabinet about what the strategy for the rollout of vaccination is. And of course, what we will do as a state is do what we've done for 12 months. We'll take the health advice and act on the health advice when it comes to vaccination. But I'd also make this comment. About 6 years ago, when I was the Health Minister, actually working in this building, one floor down, when the building was quite different to the shape it is in today, I called on the federal government to review the manufacturing capacity for vaccines in Australia. We had a problem in getting supply of whooping cough. We then had a problem in getting supply of flu vaccine. I called on the federal government to do a review and to make sure we had that sovereign capability as a nation. They laughed in my face. The then Federal Health Minister laughed in my face, and Australians are now paying the price. The budget? Yes, of course. The work on preparation of budget never stops. When one budget concludes, another one starts. So we are working hard to pull the budget together. And I beg your pardon? Well, we'll announce all of those outcomes when we do the budget. But of course, as we see, it's every week and every month is challenging for economies, not just here in Australia, but around the world. So we're monitoring things closely. We're looking at our fiscal settings to ensure we get the best outcome for taxpayers. As I've said before, every dollar matters. Every dollar matters to me as Treasurer, and every dollar matters to Queensland taxpayers. So getting the best outcome for public investment, focusing on frontline services, creating jobs, and building the infrastructure a growing state needs. They will continue to be our priorities, and we will reveal the details in the budget when it's handed down in the middle of June. I'm not playing that game, Lydia, of ruling in, ruling out. The reality is we have to look at all of the issues impacting on the formation of the budget, and including our revenue streams, our expenditure decisions going forward, to make sure we focus on those things that matter to Queenslanders: jobs, infrastructure, and of course frontline services. And that will remain our priority. And getting that mix right is the challenge of every budget, and we'll continue to focus on that in the future. Yes, of course. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I couldn't help you with that earlier. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. That's great.